at today's event. My name is Fleur Newman, and I lead the work on gender and climate change at UN Climate Change Secretariat. UN Climate Change is excited to have joined with UNEP and other organisations represented by today's speakers to co-lead the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition under the Generation Equality Forum, which is convened by UN Women and co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France in partnership with youth and civil society. There is already an existing fruitful partnership between UN Women and UNEP, demonstrated by the ongoing program in Asia Pacific on climate and gender, and the new upcoming regional program in Europe and Central Asia, showing how joint actions between partners can be instrumental in bringing about changes on gender-responsive climate action. At UN Climate Change, we see the Action Coalition as a unique opportunity to consolidate efforts and enhance the implementation of the 5-year Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan that was agreed by countries at COP25 in Madrid. Today, we see one of the advantages of meeting virtually as we are joined by an esteemed group of panelists from Serbia, the Maldives, Philippines, Turkey, and Kyrgyzstan. We are also joined by around 200 registered participants, including government representatives, youth climate activists, women leaders from civil society, development practitioners, members of the public, and we are all looking forward to the insights from our distinguished panelists. If you have any questions during the panel discussion, please submit the questions via the Q&A function. And we have prepared a one-question poll for you. We would love to know which part of the world you are joining us from today. Please submit your answers directly in the poll with the choice that fits your location best. And your choices are Europe, Central Asia, Asia Pacific, North America, Southern America, Africa, and Australia. Once you've selected, make sure you press submit. Give it a few more moments to see the results. Okay, so overwhelmingly, it's Europe, but we have just about every other region covered, and it's great to have everyone here today. So thank you. It's my pleasure to now invite Alia El-Yasser, UN Women Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, to open today's event. Alia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fleur. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues, partners, and friends, I want to thank you all for joining this important discussion today on gender equality and climate change, which has been jointly organized by UN Women and UNEP. The UN Secretary General is urging the international community to focus on what he has called the existential threat of climate change, because climate change is the test of our generation and for future generations. And it is the biggest challenge of this century. We hope that today's roundtable will help us all to examine practical and innovative climate change initiatives. We want to explore how women and girls can be more fully engaged in climate actions, because after all, they possess remarkable but largely underused and underappreciated capacities, skills, and knowledge. Women's potential often remains untapped because of social stereotypes which devalue their knowledge and they exclude them from decision-making. We know that less than 30% of the representatives of climate negotiating bodies in the Europe and Central Asia region where I am placed are women. Yet we know that the impact of climate change is gendered and often felt more heavily by groups of women and girls, especially those in countries most at risk of disaster. Climate change exacerbates an uneven distribution of labor. Across the whole world, women spend 2 to 10 times more hours on household activities and unpaid care work than men. And this burden can increase significantly in times of disaster. Women are also hardest hit by climate-related forced displacement. Nearly 80% of women who are displaced by climate change are women. And their displacement is putting them at greater risk of gender-based violence. We know that in Central Asia, more than 60% of the people working in agriculture are women, and yet they are remaining largely marginalized in the discussions about the potential impact of climate change on the availability of agricultural resources. We cannot have a discussion on climate change without addressing the deeply rooted inequalities that exist for half of the world's population. And we cannot have discussions on how to respond to climate change or disasters in communities without ensuring that women have a seat at the table. Given their position on the front line of the climate change battle, women are uniquely situated to help us all to find the ways to mitigate the causes of global climate shift and to adapt to the impact. At UN Women, we've consistently advocated that the best way to build climate resilience for households, communities, countries, and the world at large is to close gender gaps in climate change response. And with our partners, we're championing solutions that put women and girls at the center of adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. Today, we are at the precipice of transformational changes. And this is top of the agenda at the Generation Equality Forum that is shortly going to be kicking off this week from the 30th of June until the beginning of July. It will be happening in Paris. World leaders and activists are expected to commit to bold actions under 6 action coalitions, including the Action Coalition on Climate Justice. And in response to these challenges, UN Women, together with UNEP, is launching the Climate and Gender Program for the Europe and Central Asia region. The program is ambitious, but it's also practical, and it builds on the great partnership experience of our colleagues in the Asia-Pacific region. And I'm really very much looking forward to hearing from them in this event today. The aim of this program is to strengthen the resilience of women and girls in the region to deal with adverse impacts of climate change and to use climate action to promote gender equality. We believe that this will help to advance mutual agendas across the Europe and Central Asia region. Amongst its goals, it will help to strengthen women's participation in decision-making processes. And we also hope that participating countries will be better placed to generate, analyze, and use sex, age, and other forms of disaggregated data to inform climate change actions and policies. And gender equality consideration will be brought into climate change strategies, policies, programs, and projects. This is our aspiration, and this is our goal. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, partners, friends, colleagues, we all know that the world can't afford to keep limiting the potential of women and girls. Women and girls must be an integral part of developing solutions to reduce the impacts of climate change. Enabling their voices, their agency, their leadership are prerequisites for resilience building and sustainable development. Climate change seems to be inevitable or inescapable. And so more than ever, women and girls' active engagement in dealing with it is more critical than ever before. I want to thank you all again for joining us today, and I very much look forward to our discussions. Back to you, Fleur.
Thank you very much, Alia, for setting the scene so clearly for today's discussion. I'd now like to invite Luis Mabulo from the Philippines, who is the founder of Cacao Project and UNEP's Young Champion of the Year 2019, to share her insights with us. Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fleur, for the kind introduction. And good day, everyone. My name is Louise Mabulo. I am a chef, farmer, and entrepreneur from the Philippines, and I'm the founder of the Cacao Project, which is a social venture aimed at positioning farmers for sustainable success. I'm also a UN Environment Program Young Champion of the Earth for Asia and the Pacific in 2019. And once again, I just want to thank you for inviting me here today to deliver this keynote. Now, I work as a young woman in promoting climate action at the grassroots level, empowering farmers and their families to live in a fairer, more equitable world that seeks to see their success. But I do this work in a country that has negative stigmas tied in with these industries that tell children that to be a farmer or from a farming family entails a life of failure or a life of poverty. And the same stigmas hold true for pursuing green jobs that focus on restoration. And on top of that, our farmers are some of the most vulnerable groups to climate change, while the Philippines is the most at-risk country to hazards brought about by climate-related issues. To hit the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, I work in this male-dominated industry as a young woman, in which it's an uphill battle to even be taken seriously, to get a foot in the door, or to act as a respected advocate in this industry. Rami, if it's all right, if you don't mind sharing my slides. There we are. Thank you very much. So each year, my community faces disasters brought upon by increasing intensities of typhoons with warming ocean temperatures, leading to continually larger and more intense typhoons with wind speeds that can go up to 300 kilometers per hour. Next slide, please. I've had to watch women and children not only endure these typhoons, but work as families to build their homes back up and salvage what is left of their belongings and livelihoods, and then be expected to return to their lives as if things were normal again. In some cases, without being provided remedies that help in that transition. And here, women and children are disproportionately affected by the triple planetary crisis, with climate hazards causing individuals to lose their homes and severe environmental degradation and soil degradation, leading to less harvests. And these harvests that not only sustain their livelihoods, but they are reliant on to put food on the table at night, and how pollution leads to a decreased quality of life that puts their health at risk. Now, my social venture was created to harness our resources, to rethink our consumption and production methods, but it was also created with the spirit of empowering these people to be a part of the movement in building the ideal world that we hope for, starting within our community. And instead of reaching out to these girls as if they were victims or beneficiaries, we look to them as partners and collaborators who have their own agency to collectively build a better ecosystem together. At the Cacao Project, we work with countless women who have built this movement and acted as leaders within communities to spearhead the movement of regreening our ecosystems and building economic agroforests. It was the women who took the leap of faith in the work we were doing and who understood our vision to create a greener, equitable community and deprogram the stigmas that acted as barriers to our growth. Next slide, please. So today it is our women at the community level who are helping us close gaps in our food systems. And I'm proud to share that we had established a women-led Cacao Growers Association who are working with us as trainers and collaborators. And it is women who are an integral group in reforming our land management, food systems, and making sound financial decisions in building responsible livelihoods. They act as knowledge resources and focal persons to ensure that our communities are built up on solid foundations for the sake of future generations. Next slide, please. So women are vital in the climate action. Oh, no, not this one. Not this slide, but it's okay. I think we can exit the slides for now. But women are vital in the climate action and restoration movement. We have been stewards. We have been stewards to our families, witnesses to the more subtle aspects of environmentalism. We experience the climate's impacts on our day-to-day lives disproportionately, and we understand the socio-cultural nuances of our communities, and we have the financial knowledge and the expertise and empathy to tackle these issues holistically. So we deserve a say in how the frameworks of this world are built up, because it is the same world that we build that one day we will raise our children, our grandchildren, and our whole families in. So women deserve formal recognition for our contributions in cultivating a world that is hospitable for our families. And all that we ask is that you work with us as equals to restore this planet and make it a safe and inclusive space for your mothers, your sisters, and your daughters. Thank you very much. Back to you, Fleur.
Thank you, Louise, for sharing your inspiring story of how change happens at the community level with women, including young women, as leaders and vital collaborators. Thank you. I would now like to invite Sandra, Special Envoy on Climate Change for the Maldives. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon from the Maldives. I'd like to begin by thanking UN Women and UNEP for the kind invitation to address this important high-level virtual roundtable. This is my first engagement as the newly appointed Maldives Special Envoy for Climate Change, and I cannot think of a more appropriate event than one on feminist action for climate justice to kickstart my mandate to help foster and drive progressive climate action. I'm proud to speak on behalf of the Maldives, who, along with Costa Rica, co-lead feminist action for climate justice within the Generation Equality Forum, in consortium with the Latin American Faculty of Social Science and the National Institute for Women. The last year and a half has been very challenging for the Maldives, as it has been for every country battling with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as found by the survey carried out by UN Women last year, on gender differentiated consequences of economic empowerment, the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women's livelihoods, care burden, and mental health. As a small island state dependent on international tourism, the upheaval in global travel proved to be devastating to our livelihoods. It demanded a review of our existing plans and an immediate reprioritization of policies that would allow us to respond and recover from the pandemic while increasing our resilience to further crises. It was a time of difficult decision-making on how to prioritize a very limited budget across a host of pressing social needs. As we did this, we recognized that supporting women and girls and increasing investment in climate just solutions are long-term investments that the Maldives and the world cannot afford to ignore and are essential to building resilience to the climate emergency. Ensuring that women are an integral part of climate decision-making requires broader structural reforms. In April of this year, the Maldives held local council elections under the amended Decentralization Act, which ensures that women make up 1/3 of the newly elected councils. This is a guaranteed 384 out of 982 seats for women. 388 women councillors were elected this year. Along with greater financial independence and an increase in budget for the councils and their women's development committees, the number of women now in leadership and policy roles, especially at a local government level, is both encouraging and exciting. Newly elected councillors are being given the opportunity to undergo training in several areas of governance, project management, policy formulation, in order to ease their transition into these roles. The challenges of local government in an island with a population of 400 who have limited livelihood options differ greatly from islands with a population of thousands whose main industries are fishing and guesthouse tourism. These differences must be reflected in policy to offer just and gender-responsive solutions. Women play a leading role in advocacy for climate justice in the Maldives. Much of this stems from the fact that the climate emergency presents an existential crisis for the Maldives and our way of life. Rising emissions and the impact of global heating is not an abstract scenario, but one that already directly impacts the woman who makes her living growing bananas, which are now more frequently destroyed by severe storms, or the family that runs a guest house who has to spend more per year to place sandbags on the shore for protection against encroaching waves. These voices are integral in our efforts to conserve the resources vital to our livelihoods. These are funds that should be diverted to other social needs. With the right kind of facilitation, we have seen the successful transition of many of these advocacy efforts to progressive policy. The need to value women's voices and incorporate gender considerations into our national programs is one that requires a consistent and constant effort. along with the structural policies that have been implemented, such as increasing paid maternity leave to 6 months, paid paternity leave to 1 month, appointing women justices to the Supreme Court for the first time, and electing women to 1/3 of all local councils, we continue to revise and strengthen our systems. With our gender equality plan now at the finalization stage, the mainstreaming of these considerations across government and society will be prioritized. The plan includes measures such as increasing the number of women in leadership positions in local government by 40% by 2025, in the judiciary by 25%, providing services such as daycare, initiating gender-responsive budgeting, and revising national data systems to include disaggregation of data by sex and age. It is hoped that having more women at the table means that the questions that are asked and the discussions that will take place and the decisions that are taken will truly reflect the diverse needs of our society. The translation of these experiences and views into policy is central to climate just solutions. As outlined in the key areas of our action coalition, we must make greater strides in increasing and easing access to finance, particularly finance that incorporates gender considerations. At the same time, we need to simplify these systems while providing more education and training to navigate the complex bureaucracies of project proposals and reporting mechanisms. We must also take steps to increase the number of women in blue, green, and STEM jobs that will be essential to achieving the ambitious net zero future the Maldives is committed to. In the face of our current climate emergency, the Maldives remains committed to ambitious climate action and just climate solutions. It is clear that only with the full empowerment and participation of women and girls will we be able to build national resilience and transition to an inclusive and regenerative economy that is both green and blue. The Maldives is proud to advocate for these values and stands committed to working collaboratively with you to achieving them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And it's wonderful that this event is your first official engagement in this role. And thank you for highlighting the very real challenges being faced across the world in response by countries across the world in response to the COVID-19 crisis, as well as the climate change emergency. It's very encouraging and exciting to hear the steps taken in the Maldives to advance women's leadership role in local government, in the justice system across society, and through enabling policies. Thank you. I turn now to Sandra, Assistant Minister from the Ministry of Environmental Protection of the Republic of Serbia. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Serbia. It is a pleasure to be here today. The climate change, as well as gender equality issues, are cross-sectoral and multi-sectoral topics, and cooperation among different institutions, sectors, and various expertise are needed to appropriately address all challenges. The Ministry of Environmental Protection is key government entity competent for protection of the environment and coordination of the climate change policy in Serbia. It is a national focal institution for UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Recently adopted climate change law is an important step toward low carbon development. On the other hand, since 2014 and the establishment of the coordination body for gender equality, Serbia has achieved several significant results in gender equality. Numerous government bodies work hard to strengthen gender equality in Serbia. For example, Serbia is one of the few countries to introduce gender responsible budgeting, and the Gender Equality Index recently adopted the new law on gender equality and committed to develop policies that will meet the needs of both women and men to ensure gender equality. Let me remind you that when it comes to representation of women in national politics, Serbia is one of the leading countries in Europe. In addition to having a woman as a prime minister, women make 50% of ministers and 40% of MPs in the national parliament of Serbia. Serbia is in a region that is highly vulnerable to climate change, where the increase of the average temperature will significantly affect every aspect of human living conditions. The initial study on different impacts of climate change on men and women was developed ahead of COP21. Since then, within the framework of climate-related projects funded by the Global Environmental Facility and technical assistance of UNDP and other development partners, we continue to mainstream the gender into climate change field. Besides that, energy poverty is the problem that affects particularly women as majority of lone-headed households and single parents. Resilience building is particularly critical for local and rural communities that rely on agriculture as their primary source of income and where women are mostly unpaid family members of agricultural households. Due to this, they are increasingly vulnerable to the combined effects of drought and flooding. If we want Serbia, society, and economy to be greener, more sustainable, and more inclusive, we need to tackle structural barriers and gaps such as women access to resources, division in labor market, division across the field of education, and gaps in decision-making. This is the reason why work on tackling climate change goes hand in hand with work towards structural transformation related to gender equality. The new law on gender equality provides obligations of the institution responsible for protection of environment to ensure that women and men have same access to opportunities to manage natural resources. It also prescribes the responsibility of the Ministry of Environmental Protection to integrate gender of all aspects of planning, managing, and implementation of the project and programs in that area of environment. With our partners from UNDP, we are already working to meet these requirements prescribed by the law and to contribute to gender equality in Serbia. Within the ongoing capacity building initiative for transparency, a comprehensive monitoring framework of gender-sensitive data in the field of climate change and environment is developed, covering 7 broad areas. First, access to resources. Second, participation in decision-making and climate change policies. Third, economy and work. Fourth, consumption and livelihoods. Fifth, education. Sixth, health. And 7, climate change knowledge, attitude, and behavior. The developed framework also provides guidelines on how and where to mainstream gender perspective, not only in climate change policies, but in other relevant policy areas. Moreover, social and gender aspects were considered during the revision of NDC and preparation of the report to the UNFCCC, where appropriate. Finally, the systematic incorporation of gender aspects in the circular economy and understanding consumer behaviors, integrating lessons learned from traditional sustainable practices, of which women are often knowledge holders, and leveraging local value chains for sustainability would not only ensure a just transition for all, but would also inform how to make the new economic paradigm operational and sustainable. In the coming period with UNDP Serbia, we will conduct a survey on the needs, challenges, and potential of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurs that implement circular economy business model with the focus on women-led businesses. This will further support development, implementation of gender-sensitive circular economy concept in the country. I'm looking forward to hearing good ideas and experiences on how we can achieve sustainable economic growth while considering all social economic aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. And it's really, again, encouraging to hear about the implementation of coordination and cooperation, institutional mechanisms, and a structural transformational approach to integrate gender across all of climate policy, including using key tools like gender responsive budgeting. So thank you very much. Before we move into the panel discussion, we have a short animated video prepared by the UN Women Asia Pacific team about the importance of including everyone in climate action. So now we move to our panel discussion. Each of the esteemed panelists will have time to provide their vision and thoughts on how to ensure inclusive and meaningful engagement of women and girls on climate actions. Today, our panelists are Ursula Milosevsky, Director of Gender and Equity at Global Green Grants Fund, Fiza Farhan, entrepreneur and global development advisor, as well as member of the UN high-level panel on women's economic empowerment from Pakistan. Olga Jamieva, Director of ALGA, Rural Women's Association, Kyrgyzstan. And Duru Babak, young climate activist from Fridays for the Future in Turkey. First to you, Ursula. Global Green Grants Fund has been one of the leading organisations in the world supporting grassroots-led efforts to protect the planet and the rights of people. Can you please share with us how you have worked on gender and climate change in the past 5 years, and why human rights and equity dimensions should be an integral part of any climate action?
Thank you for your questions. It's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, indeed, Global Green Grants Fund since 1993 has been one of the leading organizations in the world which supports grassroots-led efforts and prioritizes building an environmentally healthy and socially just world. We use a model where activists are building their own funding agendas and make the decisions about where the funding goes. So it's a participatory funding model that decentralizes and shifts historic power structures within philanthropy. It is true that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change, especially in developing countries. But I think it's important also that we remember the whole picture and not just talk about women and girls as victims. They are also designing, leading, and implementing sustainable and lasting solutions to climate change. But only 0.2% of all foundation funding is directed to these initiatives. And that has to change. And this is part of what drives our commitment at Global Green Grants Fund to funding women and girls environmental action. We envision a world in which climate and environmental agendas are inclusive and provide sustainable and gender just climate solutions, resulting in a healthy, safe, and equitable world for all. And the way that we do that and kind of meet that vision are a couple of ways. So we fund gender just projects that help women and girls access their rights to decision-making about their environment, political participation, land ownership, and more. Global Green Grants Fund is one of the leading funders also in supporting women in environmental climate action. We support over 300 women and girl-led projects per year to protect the planet. And the second way that we kind of work toward achieving our vision is also raising awareness and building capacity in the philanthropic community about the importance of funding at the intersection of women's and girls' rights and the environment. And one of the things that we've done is publish a mapping report that is really looking at the funding landscape for women in the environment, particularly in philanthropy and private philanthropy in the United States and Europe. And we also have a funder learning community for women in the environment to encourage peer-to-peer learning with funders and share so that they can share strategies, their challenges and successes around funding women and girls' rights within climate change and climate justice work, and successes that they are engaged with and successful strategies and making the connection between women's rights and environmental justice. So regarding your question about human rights, we're living in a time of radical government or radical global environmental, social, and political shifts that call for radical responses and a collective visioning of a just future. So systems of oppression and inequality and exploitation are responsible for this current reality. And the same systems that are driven by and depend on economic models of natural resource extraction and exploitation and profit at all costs are the same systems that depend on structural oppression and inequality to remain viable. So we believe that if we want to effect real change and ensure sustainable, relevant, and lasting climate solutions, we need systems change. Global Green Grants is deeply invested in a feminist framing of climate justice, which reflects our values of equity and shifting power, and not just challenging systems of oppression, but also supporting solutions to the status quo. I'll stop there. Thank you very much,
Ursula. And yes, it's a systems issue that needs systems responses. And it's made, it perhaps is not surprising, but it is still shocking that this very small number, when you look at the financing, and this is definitely something that has to change. So next to Fiza Fahan, given your experiences as an entrepreneur who operated a small-scale energy enterprise and as a high-level advisor on gender issues around the world, what specific challenges do you think women entrepreneurs are facing in scaling up climate change technologies and to participate in the green economy? And secondly, what opportunities do you think are also arising in this ecosystem for women in climate action?
Right, thank you so much, Fleur. And how much time do I have to address these questions? Because I can go on and on the challenges.
If you could keep your initial comments to 5 minutes.
I'll try my best to do that. So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having me here. Okay, so quickly then, on the challenges, as you just mentioned, I've experienced challenges in the woman-led RE enterprise on a multidimensional tangent. Being a young practitioner myself back in the days when I launched Baksh Foundation, Baksh Energy, I think the first female CEO of a private sector company in the energy business in Pakistan, being the only woman in a room of 100 men, 200 men, not just in Pakistan, but internationally. I've seen that trajectory and I've experienced those challenges up front, which are now enabling me to provide solutions when I'm in the advisory realm or when in a more kind of, influence space where I can create solutions. Secondly, I feel that the challenges for women across the tangent are kind of the same, be it the urban woman or be the rural woman. I had the privilege of not just being a young female entrepreneur myself in the energy space, but also creating projects for women energy enterprise in the rural space, lighting 1 million lives, Liter of Light, and similar projects, which was a huge learning experience, sharing that the nexus between gender equality and access to energy, or gender equality and climate resilient action, is not just applicable for women in the cities or the urban spaces, but it also applies to women in the rural spaces, where the problem of access to energy is even larger than those in the cities. So out of all of this, and then leading to my advisory role now, where I'm advising different UN agencies, development organizations on multiple projects that bring a nexus, for me, the top 3 challenges that I still see, despite the decades of work that has been going on in the space, is number 1, still there is a lack of a combination of technical education and business education for entrepreneurs. Either you get your MBAs and you get your business education, or your entrepreneurship education, or you get your technical engineering, energy-based education. I feel there's a missing link between combining the two in a holistic educational platform, be it a vocational training platform, a skills provision platform, but impart a combination of technical and business education to young girls with the add-on feature of digital learning, ICT, and technology now, because post-COVID, we all realize that's going to be a very important enabler in our lives. So I still feel, if I scan the offerings that are currently happening around the world, I still feel that challenge which existed 20 years ago. And I think there's an immediate need to resolve that challenge. Number two is a lack of mentorship and inspiration, I feel. Platforms like these are fantastic in bringing together stories, best practices, case studies. I was very inspired to hear from the young entrepreneur in Philippines. We need to do more of this. We need to create more of this mentorship and this inspiration because young women are afraid. They're afraid to enter in this highly male-dominated sector. They're afraid of failing. They're afraid of having to give up, and failing at some point. And that's why not many even dare to step out in the field of the male-dominated energy sector. Those who do, not all of them pass through the middle ranks to go to the senior leadership. What we need to do is to showcase examples, is to showcase best practices, is to tell them that every woman who went through this path or trotted this path experienced the same problem. You're not the only one in it. With their problems, their solutions, and enable them to not reinvent the wheel that we all did in our lives, but share our stories in daily problems that we faced. Mentoring, really, mentorship platforms. But I'm very pleased to know that SE for All, Empower, UNEP, Women are working towards this direction. And I'm very pleased to be a part of many of these mentorship platforms as well, because that's certainly what's needed. And more outreach of that, I think, is needed. Number three would be a lack of a collective voice or agency for these women entrepreneurs, for the young entrepreneurs, as well as for the potential entrepreneurs, the existing entrepreneurs, and the successful entrepreneurs. I feel there has to be a collective platform for everybody to come together on, for a collective voice, a collective sharing, to know you're not there in it alone, for sharing your problems, for identifying solutions, for talking, for kind of recreating solutions that are needed. There needs to be a network, connectivity. One way or the other, be it a digital platform, be it a virtual platform. Now we all know that being all over the world, we can happily connect on this virtual media. So perhaps things are easier that way in bringing not just the successful entrepreneurs with the potential entrepreneurs together, but existing cohorts of potential entrepreneurs together as well, or women in the energy space in any dimension to come together and be able to learn from each other, share their problems, and also have a collective voice and agency for policymakers, for people who can actually change policy reforms or create incentives for women-led RE businesses. Which organization should they reach to have a collective voice, to know what's really happening, to have collective realities? So I think this collectivization is very important. So these would be my three main challenges. I think there are lots of others, but I think from cultural backgrounds to social backgrounds to economic access to finance, whatnot. But I think these three would top the tier for me, because once you address these, you find solutions to all the other barriers. The opportunities, well, I started in like nearly 20 years ago. It was a virgin market then. And if I look at the space in terms of the numbers and in terms of the growing climate resilient market, I feel it's a virgin market now. So the opportunity is huge. Back then, the market for renewable energy was not as much as it is now. The understanding that we need to have renewable energy as a business, as a affordable, reliable, sustainable business model is the only way to achieve climate action in the private sector, especially, is the reality that we've now all achieved. In a country like Pakistan, people are shifting to solar for a commercial need, not for the environmentally good thing to do. So that business case is established. With that, we have a huge market to tap now. And if I still look at the number of female participation rate from senior management to entry levels, it's insignificant. So the market is huge. It's still a virgin market out there. And I feel that projects like Empower, which I had the privilege of recently working with, or PFAN, looking out for female entrepreneurs to provide them with access to finance or finance their business models, are areas that are available, opportunities that are available, or green funds that are looking to invest in women-led green businesses. There are lots of them out there right now. We did not have them back in my practitioner days. So I feel today the opportunities are huge, and we do have platforms for support. Again, this collectivity will bring those platforms connected with the potential entrepreneurs so they can make use of them as well and succeed in their entrepreneurial journey. So thank you. I think I don't want to go above time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fiza. And so I've heard collective now twice in both Ursula's and yours. And I think this is a very important point about the need for a level of collective action and collaboration that perhaps we've not been used to in the past, and that's where we need to be moving to. And good to hear that you feel that there are many opportunities, because I think that's a very important message to communicate.
Indeed. Thank you.
So turning now to Olga, Janet there. Olga, you are the founder of the NGO ALGA, which advocates for the rights of rural women in Kyrgyzstan. How have climate change and the environment crisis affected the current situation of women in rural parts of your country? And what are some of the challenges, and how being a co-lead of the Action Coalition on Climate Justice can help tackle these challenges?
Thank you so much, Fleur, and hello to everyone. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be part of this wonderful panel and to share the aspirations and perspectives from Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia. So Kyrgyzstan is a mountainous country, and due to its geographical location, is one of the most vulnerable countries to changing climate in Central Asia. For example, melting glaciers due to climate change and multiple environmental degradation leads to the scarcity of water for agriculture and farming now. More than 60% of the population live in rural area, and women in rural communities are very much dependent on water and energy resources to sustain their livelihoods, families, and food security. Pollution of air and water resources, loss of biodiversity, land degradation, and the loss of pastures. This environmental crisis exacerbates economic and social vulnerability of rural women. Women in Central Asia are still in a disadvantaged position in spite of some progressive changes in the legislation and the national policy on gender equality. In the context of fragile economy, turbulent political processes, increasing influence of religious fundamentalism and patriarchy, hidden discrimination of women, and especially women from vulnerable groups is widely spread. To respond to these challenges, I felt compelled to establish ALGA Association, founded and driven by rural and grassroots women of Kyrgyzstan, which is committed to advancing women's leadership, participation, resilience, and capacity building in Central Asia. Now, ALGA is also very highly honored to be a co-lead of the Action Coalition on Climate Justice. And the participation in the Action Coalition enabled ALGA and its partners to strengthen capacity of the women's movement and the development of the national and regional cooperation for advocacy, for struggling for economic justice for women, for women's participation in the regional peace-building processes, and in the development of the gender climate justice and environmental risks reduction policies and action plans. Being part of the Action Coalition for Feminist Action on Climate Justice, ALGA will support grassroots women with capacity building and trainings and sharing of information systems and technologies. ALGA will advance the blueprint's vision of enhancing and leveraging the capacity of women and girls in all of their diversity to build resilience to climate and disaster risks and mitigate climate change. ALGA will also advance women's participation and leadership in transition towards a green, regenerative and circular economy by supporting capacity building, particularly around energy transitions and gender-just energy solutions. With the increased resourcing and scaling up of microcredit allocation programming for rural women, ALGA also commits to advancing the provision of gender-just climate finance to women and feminist-led climate solutions. So this is just in short. Thank you so much, Fleur.
Thank you very much. Very important points there about the interconnectedness of issues around climate resilience, economic justice and peace building, and the critical role that women's associations and organizations and women-led solutions can bring to these issues. So thank you. Turning then to Duru Babak. From Fridays for the Future movement, we have seen that today's young voices, and especially young women and girls' voices, are at the forefronts of climate action. The movement has been started by school students like you. Do you think there is a disconnect between older generations and younger generations when talking about the climate? And what can we do to overcome this?
Firstly, thanks for inviting me. And yes, I think there's a big disconnection, because if there wasn't any, we wouldn't be in a crisis like this right now, actually. The younger generations are trying to fix the situation that the older generations created. So most of the decision makers of today are from older generations, and the fact that very few climate policies have been implemented by governments, despite millions of youth climate activists demanding climate justice, shows that there's a big disconnection between the two generations. Because the older generations put profit over the planet, we are now starting to pay the price of years of climate inaction. But millions of young people are trying to force politicians to make policy changes to achieve the 1.5-degree goal set by the Paris Climate Agreement. In our climate strikes, our main demand is always to listen to science. We're not climate scientists, but what science says is really clear. The climate crisis has already been solved, but the solutions are not implemented. So we lack political will from older generations. I think that one of the ways to overcome this is by giving young people a place at the table when making decisions that will affect future generations. And also, the young people who are aware of the climate emergency should communicate at all levels with older generations. While communicating with them on climate change, I believe that it is important to emphasize that their children and grandchildren won't have a livable future on this planet if we don't act now. Once they understand that their children's future is at stake, they might act and demand change from our leaders to prevent the worst consequences of the climate crisis. Secondly, I think that we must establish some clear values among different generations. We need to make clear that we can no longer live like this. We can no longer continue to consume our Earth's resources like they're limitless. We can no longer allow the fossil fuel companies to manipulate the policies that will affect our future. And we can no longer act like we're not a part of nature, because we are. And we depend on Earth systems to live. And if we don't use them sustainably, we're putting future generations at risk. If we share these core values with people from different generations, I think that we can act together to fight the climate crisis, and we can finally unite behind science. And we can also overcome this by making climate science more accessible to everyone. We should have conversations about climate change, especially with people from different generations than us. Because we cannot achieve our climate targets without being inclusive. We need collective action, and we need it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Duru. And I hear that word again, collective. And I think this is an important point about the fact that it seems like an obvious point, but needs to be reinforced, that our Earth's resources are not limitless and that we need to make changes. So thank you, Duru. Thank you to you all. And your actions demonstrate how climate change solutions can be more effective when they include measures to advance gender equality and empowerment in girls and in the collective. And it's up to us to all find sustainable solutions. So we're going to move on now to question and answers. And I'm going to ask the first question to Ursula and to Olga. So first to Ursula, when we talk about climate justice, what are the key points that should always be taken into account?
Thanks for this question, Flor. It's a big one. You know, one of the things that I want to emphasize and something that's really powerful for global green grants and our approach to funding is this concept of intersectionality and climate justice being about decentralizing power, deconstructing power and traditional power dynamics, and an inclusive approach to climate justice and climate action. And so there's a quote from the IPCC report that says, "Gender is a key axis of social inequality and intersects with other systems of power and marginalization, including race, culture, class, socioeconomic status, location, sexuality, and age, to cause unequal experiences of climate change, vulnerability, and adaptive capacity." And so again, we go back to this, this issue of the same systems that are driven by and depend on economic models of natural resource extraction and exploitation are the same systems that depend on structural oppression and inequality to remain viable. So they're not separate and siloed issues. And so in terms of, key points to always take into consideration with climate justice is that it doesn't operate in silos, and it is something that has to be addressed again at the root causes and in an inclusive and equitable way. And so some of the things that I think, some points to remember, to always take into consideration in terms of climate justice is, and this is again from, a funding perspective, but can be applied to all of the different types of sectors that are represented in the participants today, is really supporting communities, and especially women and youth and Indigenous peoples on the front lines of climate change, who are resisting, mitigating, adapting, and strengthening resilience to encroaching climate challenges, and who have historically been excluded from decision-making, from political participation to access to financial resources and rights to land and clean water and healthy food. This also means opening up and ensuring that climate finance flows and funding streams from governments are accessible to women-led and girl-led organizations, again, at a local level that have traditionally been unable to access the billions of dollars of climate finance that exist around the world in different types of funding mechanisms and structures within governments. I think a couple of other important pieces to remember about climate justice, especially related to looking toward a gender just future, is supporting local women and girls driving the environmental agendas and their action, and influencing institutions driving those agendas. So going back to helping institutions across sectors, corporations, governments, private philanthropy, to really open up their funding requirements and criteria so that these excluded historically groups can get access to funding. And supporting girls as decision makers, women and girls as decision makers and not just participants. I think a lot of people talk about, in this sector, we talk about, bringing women and girls to the table. Well, just bringing them to the table isn't going to really change anything necessarily. And so they need decision-making power, actually, and the ability to influence how their future is going to look. And supporting initiatives that are actively centered in girls' rights and gender justice. Again, without this gender justice, we're not going to have climate justice. And also supporting action based on strengthening women's power within environmental movements, and not just reinforcing this framing of disempowerment of women as victims of climate change.
Thank you so much. And yes, very important points throughout there, but I think it really is an important point to make around what meaningful participation and leadership looks like, and that this is about structural change. So, and that it has to happen both within and from external pressure as well. So the same question to you, Olga. When we talk about climate justice, what are the key points that should always be taken into account?
Thank you so much for this question. It is very important. So I think that first of all, we need to implement an approach that can create equitable access to and control over resources, a gender-just cooperative model. Evidence shows the strong potential of agricultural and technology cooperatives to increase access to resources while boosting women's empowerment and closing gender gaps. It has a strong positive impact on women's income and decision-making power at the household, group, and community level. This is a vital opportunity to invest in such a model to build resilience of women and girls at the grassroots and the rural levels. And secondly, so women and girls are also missing from climate decision-making processes, including at the local or municipal level, due to lack of information or capacity to engage in such processes. We must implement actions and commitments that lift up the invaluable expertise of marginalized groups, such as grassroots, rural and indigenous women, by enabling them to access climate planning processes, starting at the rural level, where they have the best knowledge for how to manage resources sustainably. This is like in short.
Thank you very much, Olga. And again, this point about women and girls as decision makers, and that this needs to be a deliberate effort. This is not going to happen by itself, and there needs to be action taken very deliberately to make this change. So, Duru, how could we make sure that the voices of young climate activists are not only heard, but also acted upon?
As I mentioned before, I think that one of the best ways to overcome this is by giving young people a place at the table when making decisions that will affect future generations. And from what we've seen so far, young people who have been able to attend international conferences are rarely allowed in the actual negotiation rooms, and this is reinforcing the idea that youth voices are given little value. However, we must create more spaces to ensure the voices of young people are truly heard on the issue of climate change. It is important that millennials have a formal seat at the table of future climate negotiations. Maybe this could be achieved by creating a new unit to represent those under the age of 30 and to allow them to take part in COP proceedings with the same status as country representatives. The decisions about our future are still being made largely without us, but young people deserve to co-design their futures. If governments only declare a climate emergency and don't act on it, it's not going to lead to meaningful changes. We know that climate change is today's existential crisis, and it is something that can still be stopped with immediate action, with youth voices part of the solution. In 30 years, when the world will be suffering from disastrous consequences of the climate crisis, our current decision makers will not be here to see the results. So we, as millennials, need to take the lead and change the direction in which we are headed. We must be the ones to say what happens. We can't let them continue their business as usual because they're killing our planet and we're the ones to pay the price. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. And yes, there needs to be a way in which young voices are included as part of the decision making, as opposed to being consulted only. And that was a really interesting proposal. So I'm going to ask the same question of you, Fiza. When we talk about climate justice, how can we make sure that the voices of young climate activists are not only heard, but also acted upon?
Right, thank you. So I'm going to kind of resonate what Duru said, and being a young activist herself, I think she's exactly hit the nail on the head. This is exactly what we need. We need young people. What we're doing right now is what we need. We need young people amongst us to make their point, to represent the young people, to talk on behalf of the young people, to raise their real concerns, and to give us solutions themselves. Solutions can only come from the young people themselves. And also, I feel that since we are kind of behind the development goals in terms of I think the SDG equation at large as well, we need to have more creative, innovative, sparking ideas. Again, the youth is fearless with that. We need young minds to come up with those innovative, sparky ideas to address climate change by really fun things. We just recently, I'll give you an example. We launched a climate innovation hub, accelerator lab in a few universities in Pakistan. And believe me, the ideas those young kids came up with our 20, 30, 40 years of experiences, we would have not thought about them. Just because, we need that spark, we need that innovation, that brilliance. Secondly, in terms of having them as part of the decision making, as Ursula said, and not just on the table, and having them part of the programmatic interventions, having them part of where the real action happens, I feel it's taken us a lot of years to have gender mainstreaming become a reality. Now, if you're looking at Jeff 7 projects, or we're looking at these are the $1 billion projects we're talking about, the ones that are actually going to lead to some action. But with whether we're talking about the $1 billion GCF projects or Jeff 7 projects, we have a gender annex, we have gender mainstreaming, gender experts are hired to ensure that gender is cross-cut throughout the programmatic interventions. Similarly, we need to now have youth mainstream throughout these large programmatic interventions. How would the project affect the youth? How will it bring young people to the table? How will it enable the future of young people with a more environmentally friendly, climate resilient future for the youth of the world? So I feel like it's taken us a lot of years to get to the point where gender is now mainstreamed in programmatic interventions and cross-cut across all priorities. Youth also needs to be prioritized, because only then we'll have actual action. For the advocacy, obviously, we need a collective platform again where young people can come together. They need to be made aware, they need to be included in the discussions. And then on the decision making, of course, we need to do what we're exactly doing right now to have more people like Duru on the table.
Thank you very much. When you say it, both of you, it sounds so simple. So I think it just needs to happen now. Before we close the panel, I'd like to ask each of you to conclude, to our panelist speakers, to conclude with one key inspirational message, which I'd like you to please keep under 1 minute, that encapsulates your vision on the Generation Equality Forum and the Action Coalition on Feminist Action for Climate Justice. So I will start with Ursula. Your less than 1 minute.
Okay. Now is the time to explore possibilities and new opportunities like the Feminist Action Coalition for Climate Justice and Feminist Action for Climate Justice, and act on a collective vision of work in which gender and climate equitable economic and political systems are the norm, not the exception.
Thank you. And then to Olga.
Thank you, Flor. Engaging grassroots and rural women in the planning, implementation, and monitoring is essential to ensure effective adaptation to climate change impacts. Women's-led programs and initiatives must be supported and enhanced to ensure women and local communities become resilient and can adapt to the risks of climate change. The Action Coalition for Climate Change and for Feminist Climate Justice has the potential to make these aspirations a reality for women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Duru.
Okay, I want to say that people say we are the leaders of tomorrow, but we are already leaders today as young people. The youth climate movement has proven this. Young people need to be at the forefront. They should lead the climate movements, co-create solutions, and have seats at the decision-making table. And I also want to remind you that while demanding change, While being a climate activist, you don't need to be eco-perfect. You just need to care. You just need to understand that the people who are least responsible for the climate crisis are the most badly affected. And this is a huge injustice. You just need to care enough to act, and then change will come. I just want you to imagine what we could achieve if the 7.6 billion people on this planet believe that they have the power to create change. And I want you to be one of the people that believes your power.
Thank you, Duru. And Fisa.
Well, fantastic message is already done. But just to add to them, I would like to say that to achieve climate justice and to address the climate crisis, as Ursula said, the time is now. We really can't waste any more time. Earlier we used to talk about this, now it's all happening in front of us. What we need are one, inclusive, and two, collaborative thinking. Inclusive and collaborative thinking, inclusive and collaborative programs, inclusive and collaborative policy, inclusive and collaborative action. To include women, to include young people, to include indigenous people, to include rural women, and inclusive policy and collaborative. To not just make it the responsibility of the governments to address climate change or the private sector or academia or civil society or development organizations, but everybody to work in their individual capacities, professionally and personally. So I think my end note will be inclusive and collaborative action.
Thank you so much. Very clear. And Alia, you have your camera on, and I would like to ask the same question of you in less than a minute.
Thank you so much. There's not much to add, but I've been thinking a lot listening to everybody who's been speaking. And just, I think it's so hard when we're, pushed and pulled in so many different directions that we can also lose the opportunities to tap into the passion that you've been talking about, or to do that collaboration, being inclusive and being collaborative, because I think opportunities can present themselves through events like this, but we really need to follow through. So my call is to everyone who has come together today is to continue the conversation beyond this event and really take it on seriously, to find the ways, and they are possible, even through whatever we're already all doing. There's ways to amplify our work and the work of others with this end in mind, because I feel the urgency of it, and I feel the urgency particularly from young people. There is a call to us all to do more and to do it quicker, and I want to find a way to do that. So I hope everybody else does too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alia. And I'm just checking, yes. And Louise, if you could also give us your last 1 minute.
Definitely. Thank you, Claire. I don't want to make it too long. I think everyone had already covered so much call to actions that I think many people can take away. But one thing is, in my audience, recognize your responsibility as a person, hold yourself accountable. Each of us as individuals, our collective action can, which is a common theme, can do a lot in the grand scheme of actually making proper change. And your lived experiences, all of those things that you have, don't discount them, because they're actually narratives and stories that build towards the narrative of how we're going to restore our planet. So please join us in this fight and in restoring our planet, building equality, and really reaching out to women who actually can help and create systems that will bring forward restoration and will bring forward a greener future where young people can just be young people, and youth activists like me and Duru can live our experiences and just really enjoy our life in a greener and better world, and where older people can actually do their job in building better qualities of life and not having to focus on the planetary crisis that we have right now. So you are part of that journey, and please help us realize that future now.
Thank you so much, and a great way to close that 1 minute round. So thank you everyone very much for your contributions today. So I would now pass the floor to our dear colleague, Dr. Janet Kaberi Macharia, Head of Gender and Safeguards Unit at UNEP. who is going to give us some reflections and concluding remarks on today's discussions. Janet, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fleur. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends in the gender and environment world. First of all, on behalf of UN Environment Program, that's UNEP, let me congratulate the speakers for their excellent interventions and insights. That was such a fantastic session that we have had. And a warm thanks also to the collaboration with UN Women in this event. Now, what we've learned today is while we navigate a new normal, we face old and familiar challenges. Climate change has not taken a break during this pandemic, with devastating floods and tropical storms, biodiversity loss and pollution. And we continue to see deep-rooted inequalities along the lines of gender, ethnicity, age, disability, amongst others. These continue to threaten to hurt our recovery even more. Again, this is how climate emergency and the pandemic are inevitably intertwined. But then we must see the silver lining here and learn from the examples of which our excellent speakers and panelists have shared with us today. This new normal and this recovery are our new opportunity for us to reconfigure how our economy can shift to a more low carbon, resilient and gender responsive path, how in addition to big businesses, we offer small, medium and informal enterprises a chance to not just to recover, but to thrive. How innovations and youth can cushion communities on the front lines of climate change. Our new normal needs to reflect a new way of how we do business. I just want to share with you where UNEP is at the moment. Our medium-term strategy for 2022 to 2025 has placed great emphasis on the achievement of gender transformative results from the work that UNEP does. To just let you know, this is the first of that this has ever happened in all the medium-term strategies that we've had over the last 10 years. An indicator for this being that 80% of our projects must have achieved transformative gender results by 2025, and certainly having partners on the ground, for example, like UNFCCC, UNDP, UN Women, we are hoping to work with you to be able to achieve these results. Again, in preparation for this implementation, UNEP senior management has identified 4 priority gender actions that must be undertaken this year to ensure that we are ready to meet the objectives of the upcoming medium-term strategy. So again, this is encouraging not only us in UNEP, but also our partners whom we always work together. Going into partnerships, last year, March 2020, as Fleur has also mentioned, UNEP, UNDP, UNFCCC, IUCN, and OECD formed a consortium to collaboratively participate in the formation of the Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition of the Generation Equality Forum. Today, this coalition, the Action Coalition is now composed of 2 member states. It was great to hear from the special representatives from the Maldives, and the other member state is Costa Rica. We have UN agencies, that is UNFCCC, UNDP, UNEP. We have IFAD, IUCN, OECD, and several civil society organizations. To date, the Action Coalition has come out with a handbook of commitments to be undertaken by not only the members of this coalition, but also interested stakeholders. So we are really looking forward to working with not only the members of this Action Coalition, with others, so that we are able to achieve the vision for the Action Coalition. At UNEP, we are delighted to have a strong partnership with UN Women and other partners in the journey of gender equality and climate action. As we know, the gender gap and emissions gap are interconnected. One of these collaborations, as many of you may know, is in Asia Pacific, where our 2 agencies are jointly implementing Empower, which is Women for Climate Resilient Societies, which rather focuses on women for climate resilient societies. We support countries in implementing more gender-responsive climate policies and actions, and we support women entrepreneurs in accessing renewable energy for climate-resilient livelihoods. As part of today's events, we have also seen this collaboration expanding to the region of Europe and Central Asia, which is great, where we plan to offer assistance to individual countries and enable regional networking and experience sharing. And we will explore ways of how we take these important points discussed further today. And of course, certainly working more closely with you and other partners along the way. Once again, I wish to thank you for your attendance and taking time to be part of such an important event. And on behalf of UNEP, we look forward to supporting further initiatives under the Generation Equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janet. And yes, it's a very exciting time to be working in collaboration with each other. I would now like to pass the floor to Mohammed Nasiri, Regional Director of UN Women for Asia and Pacific, who will also make some concluding remarks. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fleur, for such a graceful moderation, and allow me also to extend my gratitude to all of you who dedicated time to hear from all the inspiring speakers. I have to say that I'm a bit intimidated, and I feel that everything that what needed to be said is already said. So I'll not necessarily bring new messages to the table, but maybe to reiterate what all the speakers have said. Identifying transformative solutions and ensuring the prioritization of meaningful engagement of women and girls in climate policy and future decision-making is really essential to establishing climate justice, increasing investments, and producing effective actions to tackle the specific impacts of climate change on women and girls' rights. As we move forward to ensure a green recovery following COVID, we must ensure that women and girls are given equal space and resources, allowing for sustainable solutions for all. Moreover, collaboration across regions can help us generate momentum, share best practices, exchange knowledge, and showcase innovative solutions, helping to seize the opportunity for inclusive climate action. Today's convening also serves as a key focal point in the build-up to the finale of the Generation Equality Forum, which was kick-started in Mexico City, as Alia said earlier, and now is culminating as we speak in Paris. The forum has already established a path towards lasting legacy of equality, and we are all looking forward to see how the Paris event will advance and solidify commitments towards making our society more gender equal as we are recovering from the pandemic. We want to see the full strength of multilateralism in promoting and defending the rights of women and girls in all areas, and more so in climate change, where tangible progress is so much needed. We hope that the conversations like this one today will be reinforced and amplified in other global fora, like the Food Summit, the Climate Change Conference, and the Biodiversity Conference. Considered the most important feminist event in the past 25 years, the Generation Equality Forum is creating a significant and lasting coalition of like-minded people passionate about gender equality. It presents a vital moment for activists, feminists, youth, and allies to achieve transformative change for generations to come. The conclusion in Paris will bring together heads of state, as well as key representatives from a range of organizations who serve as legislative, financial, and agenda commitment makers to achieve tangible and measurable results over the next 5 years as part of the Gender Equality Acceleration Plan. The guidance and key insights provided by today's roundtable on gender inclusive climate action has therefore helped create a valuable blueprint for action, sparking engagement and positive progress on a global level by informing the ambitious commitments that will come together in Paris, thus fostering gender equality for generations to come. I once again wish to thank all of you for taking the time to be part of such an important chapter on the path towards gender equality. And back to you, Fleur.
Thank you so much. And yes, I add my thanks to all of our speakers today and panelists to have shared your insights, to have brought your knowledge and wisdom to everyone who has participated today. And today's roundtable demonstrates the importance of us working together collectively in collaboration, and the excellent partnership between UN Women and UNEP that has brought this event together. And this is our moment to really consolidate all of the work that is going on in different parts of the world and come together to make real change, as Mohammed has just mentioned. And so thank you very much to UN Women and UNEP for having invited me to moderate today. It's been my absolute pleasure. And thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, as I said, for your wonderful contributions. And now we will close the event with a short video from the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalition. Thank you.
While we waited, a woman was locked down with her abuser.
While we waited, a girl was forced out of school.
While we waited, a mother fed her children, not herself.
In the year the world stopped,
Women's rights were reversed, undoing years of progress. Just like that.
As the world begins to turn again,
we must begin to act.
For the 1 in 3 women who have experienced violence in their lifetime.
For the 47 million more women being pushed into extreme poverty because of the pandemic.
For the 50% of the population
who deserve 50% of the power.
This year, leaders and changemakers will meet at the Generation Equality Forum.
A forum to build up and strengthen women's rights for generations to come.
Let's show that we're standing up
so equality can step forward.
And in a year where it's virtually impossible to meet, we'll meet virtually.
Don't wait. It's time to act for equal.